Well, the media has forgotten what happened in Flint, but the Michigan Supreme Court has wiped out charges against former Governor Rick Snyder, his health director, and 7 other people for their role in the Flint water scandal, saying a judge had no authority to issue indictments.
So a reporter with Status Coup, Jordan Chariton, joins us now to weigh in. Jordan has been covering this since the beginning. Jordan, this was somewhat expected. First of all, why was it expected? And what was the rationale that the Supreme Court used to let Snyder go here?
Yeah, for viewers that don't know, there was a original Flint water investigation for 3 years, starting in 2016. Then when the current Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel, entered office, she overhauled that investigation. She fired the special prosecutor and restarted from scratch. As part of that new second investigation that started in 2019, they actually used a pretty rarely used process of a one-man grand jury, which is basically just a judge who issues the indictments. And a one-man grand jury, in this case a judge, issued the indictments for willful neglect of duty against Governor Snyder, as well as crimes against the 7 other defendants. And the Michigan State Supreme Court, their ruling was that that violated the Constitution, the state constitution of Michigan, and that a judge can issue subpoenas and search warrants, but not an indictment against the governor and the 7 other defendants. So basically, on a constitutional technicality, in my view, the charges were dismissed against the governor and the 7 other defendants.
Yeah, and so what do we know, if even Rick Snyder is being, legally he's getting off on, as you describe, a technicality, what do we know about his culpability here? What do we know about what he knew and when he knew it?
Yeah, I've reported over the years, including for Ryan Grimm's The Intercept, that the governor's and his chief of staff, health department director, there was an avalanche of phone calls between the 3, 6 months after the water switch, that prosecutors concluded was the governor himself helping to cover up the deadly Legionnaires outbreak, which killed a lot of people in Flint. We also know that the governor's top officials in his health and environmental department, their phones were erased shortly before the launch of the Flint criminal investigation. We know that the governor refused to hand over key documents and briefings that were delivered to him to prosecutors for years. And we know that the governor perjured himself to Congress, claiming that he didn't know about the Legionnaire's disease until January 2016, when evidence exists that he knew about it 16 months earlier. Finally, we know that the original Flint water investigation was building an involuntary manslaughter case against the governor. But like I said, they were fired by current Attorney General Nessel. So there's a lot of evidence against Governor Snyder. It's a real head scratcher, would be an understatement, why he was only charged with neglect of duty, which is a misdemeanor, and why these other facts were not included in possible more severe charges against Snyder.
Has Nessel ever given a rationale for why the use of this one-man grand jury, and what are others' guesses as to why she would have taken this approach rather than a normal grand jury?
Well, in fairness to her, if you actually believe it, she says she recused herself from the criminal investigation. So she appointed 2 prosecutors and says her fingerprints are not on it. Most sources and legal experts don't actually believe that. But the theory behind the one-man grand jury, Nessel criticized her predecessors that she fired, that it was taking too long. The investigation was already 3 years, and they wanted to expedite it. So using this one-man grand jury, in their argument, could speed things up in terms of charging more people and actually getting the cases to a jury, because the original investigation and prosecutors, there were year-long pretrials, which were some of the longest in Michigan history. The one-man grand jury skips the pretrial process and just goes straight to the indictment. So frankly, in a nutshell, the current Attorney General erased 3 years of investigative work. She cleaned house of the special prosecutor and a chief investigator who, in his previous time had been instrumental in bringing down the Gambino crime family in New York. She fired that investigator and used this, again, rarely used device, the one-man grand jury. So she's got a lot of questions to answer. You know, MSNBC and others love her, have her on for more January 6th and issues related to taking on the Republicans. But the Michigan media, the national media, have not questioned her on, A, why did you fire this whole team in 2019 that had already charged 15 state and city officials? And now, you know, why did you use this process when, according to the Michigan State Supreme Court, it violated the Constitution?
Now, some of this might feel like old history to people that are following it or haven't followed it super closely. But if you do follow it closely, you know that it's certainly not over. The consequences were not fast or rapid or as quick as a news cycle for the people of Flint. Jordan, what can you tell us about the continuing fallout in Flint? How is this very much an ongoing crisis in Flint?
Yeah, the best way I could explain it is Flint has had kind of an 8-year pandemic. When you're talking about COVID, but it's a slow burn. When you're dealing with heavy metal poisoning, you don't die right away. You get sicker and sicker as the years go on. So I've been there almost 20 times. Every time I go, residents that I've gotten to know, they're either coming down with new ailments or they've died. We're talking cancers at relatively young ages with no family history, liver failure, kidney disease, all sorts of autoimmune issues. Residents are getting sicker and sicker every time I go there. Within the last year, I've spoken with residents in person. They're showing me rashes they're still getting from the water, despite the state of Michigan and the EPA claiming the water is now safe. They do not have Medicare for all. They had a short-term Medicaid expansion that is up. So medical bills are mounting. And I mean, most infuriating, all the pipes haven't been replaced after 8 years. They still have busted pipes, and the residents' home plumbing, the interior plumbing, has not been touched. So there's real questions regarding claims the water is safe, and residents are dealing with, more and more health problems on top of a pandemic. And sadly, aside from a few outlets, the media really has moved on from this. So it really is Flint residents 8 years later kind of still out for fending for themselves.
And are there any remaining avenues of accountability for Governor Snyder here?
I'm not a lawyer, but there are statute of limitations in Michigan for involuntary manslaughter is 10 years. So there's still time if a prosecutor was to bring those charges. Nessel and her prosecutors are claiming, saving face, that they're going to, try to recharge the charges that were just dismissed through whatever process the Supreme Court of Michigan says they have to take. But it's hard to believe after the governor, who's, by the way, worth $200 million and has an army of attorneys, after these charges are dismissed, that they would be successful in recharging him unless new evidence mounts. So, technically they could recharge him with similar crimes or more severe crimes, but we're talking 8 years later, witnesses' memories fade. So I think it's going to be an uphill climb for Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, and her team to recharge the governor and these other officials with serious crimes. And, the residents of Flint I've spoken with are, it's a mix of fury and sadness because, imagine this happening to you, being poisoned, and 8 years later, no one has been, brought to justice.
What about the perjury charge? It seems like that one is just kind of ignored no matter who's testifying to Congress nowadays.
Well, as I'm sure the Hill talks about often, the Democratic Party doesn't really seem to want to fight for much. After I broke several of these stories we mentioned, including in The Intercept, I reached out to the House Oversight Committee, who Snyder came in and perjured himself to. And, they gave me kind of a canned statement that our reporting, troubled them and they'd look into it. And that was that. I followed up after more revelations and never heard back. So technically, the Democrats still control the House and the House Oversight Committee. They could use many of the details from my reporting and elsewhere to bring Governor Snyder back in. The late Elijah Cummings, before his death, was pushing to bring Snyder back in. Actually, former Flint Mayor Karen Weaver was on the record that the governor, at Governor Whitmer's inauguration, Governor Snyder asked the former Flint mayor, get Cummings to back off of investigating me. So the House Oversight Committee can bring Snyder back in, question him on his claims, particularly on that he didn't know about the deadly Legionnaires outbreak until January 2016, which evidence indicates he knew about it 16 months earlier, did not notify the Flint residents when there was time to save lives. So I would ask the House Oversight Committee, Chairman Carolyn Maloney, why they haven't brought Governor Snyder back in, because I do believe perjury is still a federal crime.
Sort of. Yeah.
Depends on who you are.
Yeah, if you care. Jordan, great reporting. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.